Welcome to the Investing Mastermind Podcast. I'm Signe Lundholt.
And I'm Michelle Markey.
Today we wanted to improvise a little bit, Michelle and I, and talk about some of the news of the world that is happening currently. So we haven't prepared for this show, and what you're going to hear today is just the two of us talking to each other as we would offline. And we thought this would be, giving you a sort of fun look into how we would discuss investing the Warren Buffett way. So one topic I wanted to start with today was the news about Credit Suisse. It's a bank in Switzerland that's currently being bought by another Swiss bank, UBS. And the reason why I believe this is so important for investors is an article I read by Salvatore Cantale, who is a professor of finance at IMD in Switzerland. And what he wrote in his article is about this deal between UBS and Credit Suisse is one of the most troubling features of this deal is that the acquisition of Credit Suisse will not pass by UBS shareholders for approval. To get this through, the Swiss authorities have to change Swiss law. And this is a blatant attack on good corporate governance and the meaning of ownership. So, in my opinion, what is happening here is really shocking. Owners of UBS, which is a publicly traded company, so the owners of UBS is shareholders, they do not get to vote on whether or not UBS should buy Credit Suisse. So right now, what's happening is that the rights of the shareholders are being ignored, and they're not being asked whether or not they agree with this acquisition. If we, broaden this out, this is something that's happening in Switzerland right now, but it could be creating a precedence for what could go on in the rest of the world. If you own Swiss stocks right now, like Logitech or Nestlé, Philip Morris, that's behind Marlboro, I would definitely reconsider if that's safe, if the Swiss government is going to change the rules so that shareholders aren't heard. It could also, again, like I mentioned, create a precedence in the global landscape. Will other countries do the same thing as has happened here in Switzerland? So it's definitely something that's important for us as investors to just take a look at. What do you think about these news, Michelle, when you hear something like this?
Yeah, I think it's definitely concerning and makes me wonder if this is a similar type of idea as what happened in the 2008 great financial crisis in the US, where banks were deemed to be too big to fail. And then they just discussed it between the government and the upper managements of other banks that were still in business and were basically making a deal at that level instead of, considering more viewpoints of the shareholders as stakeholders that will be affected. So I haven't studied so closely how some of those deals went through, if at the time, if any of the shareholders of some of those banks in trouble were at all consulted, or if they were allowed to vote on any subjects. But it would be surprising if the shareholders are not allowed to be placing their thoughts on the matter, that it's just a deal between very few people that can have a major implication. And so if the government decides that Credit Suisse is too big to fail and that they need to do this out of an emergency so that the greater good can be protected, maybe that's the rationale, is that maybe they are bypassing, so some of the rights maybe of shareholders are not as important when it is more important for the systemic good of the whole society. So all the millions of people, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also, what they have been saying is that, well, it's to actually protect the stock market from not crashing after these news came out. And, I've also seen that some of the reactions to these news is that people are writing, well, they had to do a quick deal, the Swiss government, in order to actually have something happen, because UBS initially did not want to pay a whole lot for Credit Suisse. So the Swiss government came in and there's some agreements that have been made, but this would have never been a anything we would have talked about if Credit Suisse hadn't been involved in so many scandals. And if you Google online, because there's so many scandals, it would take the whole podcast to just talk about the scandals that has happened with the company in recent years. And if they weren't doing stuff like that, we wouldn't be in this position, right? So what comes first is something that I'm thinking about. I'm definitely very, very concerned about that shareholders no longer are being asked. And I'm concerned if this would actually be, broadened to other Swiss companies or, other businesses in the world. And what Cantale writes is that changing the law to bypass shareholders hardly constitute good corporate governance and sets a dangerous precedent. I really agree with that. It's something that we could look out for as shareholders and also determine, are we comfortable investing the Swiss exchange or are we not? I don't know if this would happen again. I know that this is a very, very special situation, but it's also quite scary that what they're doing right now is really shocking.
Yeah. And I mean, bank stocks are not really within my circle of competence. So it's hard for me to really say what I think of exactly some of these banks because I know many of them are kind of having controversial situations happening to them, like including Deutsche Bank and also in the US, Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic. All of these are in trouble, maybe for different reasons, maybe for related reasons. And what I think this is a lesson for all of us is that before we invest, we really need to learn and understand not only an industry, but some of these individual banks because they're not just all the same. They do things a little bit differently and some are well capitalized and very strong banks like JP Morgan Chase and even there's been discussions of Jamie Dimon maybe helping out with potentially some of the US banks that are in trouble. There have been some discussions of that line, but you can only get to that point, if you've studied some of these banks closely, and I haven't studied Chase, so I don't know, if whatever they're doing is a good move or it's like a charity move just to, help the financial system in the US. Like, of course, in business, nobody should be just doing something out of charity. They should be doing it because it will help the bottom line and their shareholders and other stakeholders. But you never know if basically the government is forcing the stronger banks to be like, look, we know you can handle this. You got to help out because otherwise there's nobody else to help out. And if we do it as the government, then that could take on more debt nationally. And then that will eventually weigh on the taxpayers. So sometimes it might be a compromise of like, even though it's not always a solution that everybody agrees with, but in some of these emergency situations, it's almost like what I've been told when I used to do sports like rugby is I was told that you can only run so fast as your slowest player because we'd run around the field and I was eager to sprint because I was a fast one and I wanted to be at the front of the line, but they said I couldn't finish the run until everybody finished the crossing line. So in a way, I feel like that's kind of happening to some of these strong banks is they're told you have to help these weak banks because it's for the greater good of the financial system. So it's sort of a tough call. Like, of course, all the shareholders in between should be given the right to voice their opinions and concerns. They should be allowed to speak their piece. But ultimately, sometimes these situations might also be out of anyone's control. So it's a really tough call. And I don't envy the regulators or the
Oh,
people
no.
who have to make
Yeah,
some of these tough decisions because whatever they decide now will be talked about in 10, 15 years, 20 years from now as people make comparisons like, oh, what did they do in 2008 compared to now?
Mm,
Should they do the same like they did then? Or, should they do something differently now based on what we've learned over the last 15 years? So I don't know.
100%. Yeah,
So
I
hard.
totally agree. It's a very, very difficult situation and very, very to negotiate a deal so that it doesn't cause a whole lot of economic trouble all over the world.
Yeah, for sure. Because maybe they see if nobody helps out this bank, it'll be a domino effect. And maybe that will lead to other adverse outcomes. But maybe the domino effect should happen. Maybe it is natural that there is a stock market crisis and, kind of like when an animal gets hunted in the wild, let's say in the African plains that uh
Savannah.
a savanna, like the gazelle gets hunted down. And then after the lions have eaten the gazelle main parts, and then the vultures come in to take whatever's the rest out of the gazelle. Maybe that's just part of the natural way that life is,
The circle of life.
like how Charlie Munger said that businesses are like humans. There's a biology, and every business has its main part of its life, and then they eventually decline, like us living organisms. So if we think
Mm-hmm.
about it like that, maybe instead of intervening and trying to keep some of these companies on life support, maybe they have
Mm-hmm.
to be willing to allow for whatever consequences happen in the stock market, and that's the natural way that nature recycles these companies.
Yeah, very, very good point. I like that point.
Yeah.
Let's jump to another topic. Everybody's talking about Chat GPT these days, right? So I read some news on the We Study Markets newsletter that the Investors Podcast Network comes out with. I highly recommend that newsletter. It's great. In that newsletter, I read about this Warren Buffett AI generator. It's a generator like Chat GPT, but instead of just being all kinds of questions, this tool that's named after Buffett will assist in analyzing financial reports and other corporate filings. And according to the man behind it, Mayo Ocean, he's an AI engineer from England. What he says is that it's the Warren Buffett way of looking through financial reports. And I was looking into his demonstration video on Twitter where he's using Tesla's annual report for the demonstration. And after watching it, I'm not 100% convinced that it is a Warren Buffett AI tool, at least from what I saw. It was a super short video, and maybe there's more to it than what I saw. But for example, he demonstrated how he asks the tool, what is Tesla's year-over-year growth rate? And then the AI tool calculates the year-on-year growth rate, but it only calculates for 2021 and 2022. And in my opinion, if it had been a Buffett calculator, it would have given us at least 10 years of growth rates year over year. So I'm not too impressed.
And maybe, yeah, it should average out the 10 years worth of data and say the average for the last 10 years was this growth rate. And also specifically in what area, if it's revenues or earnings per share, or like some of those specifics would be helpful to differentiate. And if they're also looking at the kinds of earnings that Buffett likes, because we know that Buffett has sometimes criticized the generally accepted accounting principles and that type of earning. So is it just using the normal GAAP earnings, or is it using what Buffett prefers of the operating earnings? So it would be interesting to see if this AI has been conditioned to properly know what Buffett's actual preferences are, like almost saying like it's been taught how Buffett invests. It knows that Buffett prefers this. Like if we knew that about this AI generator that I'm going to call, it's like a glorified calculator, if we know that, then maybe there could be some truth to it. Or even better, if Buffett himself would have endorsed this calculator, then maybe it's great. Maybe it's useful. But until the man himself that it's named after will endorse it or say, yeah, it's doing a good job, then I think there's still room for us to have some reservations and really think, like, in my opinion, it sounds a little bit incomplete yet, because it can still not ever give you the final answer. Just like a calculator doesn't necessarily give you the final answer to your math problem. Like, it's ultimately a human judgment call if you were to make an investment in anything. And just because you can get growth rates or pull out certain data out of financial reports, that's just one piece of the puzzle. So I would take it still with a grain of salt, no matter how cool everybody's so enamored with AI right now. But maybe that's just, kind of like how everybody was enamored with Internet 1.0 in the 1990s. Maybe that's what we're going through now with like AI, is that we're just in the very beginning stages of what AI could be useful for.
100%. I think it's like it's the beginning of the internet, and Bill Gates also described it as, the beginning of something new. To me, it's just a game changer, and we all have to get used to this new tool. Teachers have to get used to this is a new world here. Everybody has to get used to that there's a new world with these AI tools, and there's probably a lot of jobs that's not going to be necessary anymore, but usually that opens up for something new. At least that's what the internet did, right? And a lot of new businesses and a lot of thriving things. So it's going to be exciting. For me, I would say please still, read the annual reports. That's how you get to know a business. I would definitely still believe that it's a good idea to read the annual report just to get to know the company. Maybe I'll change my mind over time with this AI happening, but for now, there's really important information in that financial report, and using AI to answer questions like the revenue growth rate. Yeah, like you say, it's a glorified calculator, and that's nice, but I don't know if there's much more to it.
Well, and also a point I want to riff on a little bit that you brought up is, even though Buffett says you want to hop over 6-inch bars and not 6-foot bars or something like that, what he's talking about is like something that you're capable of understanding. So I don't think he's talking about shortcuts that you can take. Like he's not saying to apply that concept to taking a shortcut to reading an annual report. Like nothing excuses your own reading comprehension of something. So even if you do use a shortcut of using an AI tool to help you learn something, that's not the same as actually doing the work yourself. So you still have to do it. So what he's ultimately referring to with the 6-inch bar is that you have studied something well enough that you have understood it clearly in your own mind, in your brain, and not just used a shortcut way from the AI tool and then made a quick judgment based on what a calculator is telling you. It should be you have arrived at your own understanding after doing the homework. Like no
Hmm.
matter how many AI tools there are, they can never replace us doing the hard research and homework so that we truly understand what we're getting involved with, so that our circle of competence can include it. Because even if we have the shortcut tool, it doesn't mean that we've truly learned. We may not have truly expanded our circle of competence. So I just want to caution that as well, of what people might come to think of, like, oh, just because we have GPSs, it doesn't mean that maps are irrelevant, and we shouldn't know how to get from point A to point B in real life. And so many people may have become too dependent on something like the GPS in our phone, and then they don't know how to navigate real life if they didn't have their phone on them. So, you have to be careful of how much you allow technology to be a crutch, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a super, super good point. And definitely AI is not there yet, at least to where they can do that. But also, just using your gut feeling is super important. And when you read all the reports and do the homework, you really get to know the business and the people behind them, and people know people. So yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely still a judgment call, no matter how much technology might help us lead better lives. Like there's so much great about it, but we can't use that as a shortcut to trying to improve as human beings. Like I think that the moral of the story is, we as humans are continuously on a quest to become better every day if we can. So
Mm.
we use it for its own limited purpose, like keeping in mind it's not the end all be all. Like no AI tool can ever replace Warren Buffett himself, because he's the best investor of all time. So, Warren Buffett is awesome. And yeah, as long as we
Yeah,
remember that, we'll be all right.
absolutely. All right. Well, that was a little bit of an introduction to how Michelle and I would discuss some of the topics that are going on in the world right now. With that, it's time to end the show. Thank you so much for listening in. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, it would mean a lot to us if you would subscribe and go rate the show. Tell your friends and family about it. We are back on Tuesday. Until then, bye-bye.
Till next time.
If you enjoyed the show and found the content informational, we would be super grateful if you would leave us a review and follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you automatically get new episodes in your feed. We publish a new show every Tuesday.
The contents of the Investing Mastermind podcast are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. None of this is investing advice, and if you need help in your personal situation, please consult with a professional.